webinar. My name is John Norai, and I'll be your moderator for today. Our topic is Set to Go, a new program to support high school readiness for college and adult life. But before we begin the program, I'd like to call your attention to the slide that's on your screen. The number at the top in red is important. If you have any difficulties during the presentation, you will need to dial that number, 855-352-9002. Excuse me, you also need that red ID number that you see at the bottom of your screen, 351-874-755. If you're tweeting during today's webinar, please use NASSP webinar, and you can follow NASSP on Facebook.com/principals. You also can go to the website after the presentation to see this in its entirety, and also to get a certificate if you choose to have a certificate of participation in today's webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Allison Maurice. Allison has a few words for you from FRAC, the group that she represents. She's a child nutrition policy analyst, and she will be just saying a few words prior to the presentation. Allison, are you with me?
Sure, right here.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Really quickly, thank you to NASSP for letting me take a few minutes to address all of you. I'm Allison Maurice. I'm a child nutrition policy analyst with the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC for short. My work is focused on ensuring low-income children have access to school meals, with much of my work focused on increasing access to the school breakfast program. But FRAC and NASSP have had a relationship for the last few years, working together with anti-hunger advocates and secondary school principals to really increase access to school breakfast in their schools. So that's why I'm going to get the first 10 minutes of your webinar today. So next slide. Just a little bit more about what FRAC is. So we are a national nonprofit working to fight hunger and undernutrition in the United States through protecting important safety nets and ensuring individuals have access to the federal nutrition programs through our advocacy work. But we do this through conducting research, working with Congress and state government agencies to improve public policies. And then we also provide very targeted technical assistance to school districts directly, and also anti-hunger advocacy organizations who are more familiar with the landscapes in their home states. But we do re-grant money to school districts directly through specific funding opportunities to help them implement better school breakfast programs. So we're definitely coming at this issue from many different angles. So next slide. So really quickly, you might be wondering, what does eating have to do with academic success? Well, school meals, particularly school breakfast, is often an underutilized tool to improve student outcomes. It's no surprise that hungry students have a tougher time staying concentrated because they are thinking about food. So next slide. So research suggests that children who skip breakfast are less able to master the tasks necessary to do well in school. Further, children who eat breakfast at school, closer to class and test-taking time, perform better on standardized tests than those who skip breakfast or even eat breakfast at home. And if I'm not sure if you do this in your schools, but many schools will actually offer a snack to students before they take a standardized test to make sure that they're nice and alert while they're doing that. And this is something that you can actually extend throughout the entire school year through utilizing alternative breakfast service models, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a moment. But essentially, you know, children who eat school breakfast can see many of these benefits, from increased math and reading scores, improved speed and memory and cognitive tests, but also improved behavior and reduced tardiness and absenteeism. We've seen just anecdotally from schools say that they see less school nurse visits, particularly in the morning when students eat breakfast, because children aren't going to the nurse complaining about an upset stomach. And then similarly, fewer disciplinary office referrals, especially during that morning time when a student does eat breakfast at school, because they aren't, dealing with hunger pains throughout the morning until they're able to get that lunch. So definitely an academic tool that schools should be better utilizing to make sure their students are well nourished for the school day. So next slide. Really quickly, every year FRAC puts out a school breakfast scorecard that looks at school breakfast participation rates across the country, state by state. And we found that for every 100 low-income students that ate school lunch, only 56.6% low-income children participated in school breakfast. So we definitely see that while many students are having access to school lunch, not as many children are being reached with that school breakfast meal in the morning. So part of our work is how to make sure that more of those children are getting that morning meal that they need. And it's great because over 90% of schools that offer lunch also offer breakfast. So it's not necessarily an issue of whether breakfast is served or not, but whether it's being served in a way that reaches the most students and is accessible for all children. So next slide. So some of the barriers to school breakfast participation with that traditional service model that occurs before the school day begins in the cafeteria is simply that students don't get to school early to eat lunch. And even if they are hungry, this might not be a possibility for them. They might have long commutes, or their parents are rushing off to work, so they only get their child to school in time. The parent might not even be aware that the school breakfast program even exists for their kids to be utilizing it. And then another thing, particularly with older students, children are very well aware that the school breakfast program has historically been classified as something that's only for the poor kids. So this can often be a barrier for some students who don't want to leave their friends early in the morning, if they're socializing in the hallway, to go grab that school breakfast meal, because it might identify them as a low-income student. So next slide. So that's why one of the best practices for reaching the most students with school breakfast is breakfast after the bell. And this includes various models, including breakfast in the classroom, where meals are delivered directly to the classroom and students actually eat that meal while the teacher takes attendance or hands out homework or collects homework, things like that. And then there's a grab and go model. This is particularly popular with older students, where they can just quickly grab the components of a meal from a cart or a kiosk in the hallway. Typically, they're placed at entryways in the school, so the student comes into the school, grabs their breakfast, and goes directly to their first period class or homeroom, however it works. And then another popular method, particularly for older students, is a second chance breakfast, which is actually what I had in my school growing up, where after the first period class, we had about 15 minutes where we could go get a breakfast or a snack. And you can often do that either in the cafeteria or paired with a grab and go model. So these are all great options, but it really depends on what your school looks like individually to decide which model will work the best. So definitely connect with your nutrition director to talk about these options, because the more children that are eating breakfast, the better their academic performance is going to be. Next slide. Part of the partnership between FRAC and NASSP is to develop resources for secondary school principals to help them implement better breakfast models. So we have this breakfast after the bell toolkit, and it's essentially going to give you tips for successful breakfast after the bell implementation, as well as sample outreach materials, event planning materials, as well as a key stakeholder survey for after the program is implemented in the school to see how it's going, so you can actually give those out to your staff. Next slide. These are just a few examples of the materials that are in the toolkit. As you can see in the upper right-hand corner with the red sample poster, you can essentially just put that up at your school and write where the grab and go can be accessed. And then the bottom image with the forks and the fruit and the pickle is actually a sample PowerPoint that you can use to educate your staff about why you want to make this change in your school. So next slide. And then as part of the partnership, we also did a school breakfast after the bell, equipping students for academic success. Secondary school principals share what works. And essentially, we surveyed many secondary school principals that have breakfast after the bell in their schools to see what their perceptions of the program were. And 87% of principals believed other principals should consider launching a similar program. 82% of principals noted increases in school breakfast participation, and you can see a host of positive outcomes observed by principals, such as improved alertness, fewer visits to the nurse, fewer occurrences of absenteeism, fewer disciplinary referrals, and then even some improved reading and math test scores. So these are coming directly from secondary school principals who have implemented these programs and have seen the benefits that they bring to their schools. Next slide. This is just giving you a little more information about what's in this report. Essentially, we surveyed 105 secondary school principals, and it just provides insights into the program, best practices for launching a program in your school, and there's a link to the report on this slide as well. Next slide. So that's all that I have for you today. And again, my name is Allison Maurice, and I will be at the NASSP annual conference. So if you want to come hunt me down there, I'd be glad to chat. But you could also feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call, and I'd love to talk about breakfast after the bell and how to make it a success in your school. So thank you so much to NASSP for having me today.
Thank you, Allison. Really appreciate it. And folks, you can send your questions directly to Allison. I see that one person has already found the question box and asked, is this a part of the presentation Set to Go, a new program to support high school students? And the answer is related, but not a part of. We're going to begin that program now. And I'm happy to introduce our presenters for Jed's vision. John McPhee serves as the Executive Director and CEO of the Jed Foundation, a national nonprofit that exists to protect emotional health and prevent suicide for teens and young adults. John brings 20 years of leadership and management experience from the business and nonprofit settings to his role at Jed. He's also passionate about supporting young adults in their transition to adulthood, serves as the board member of Bottom Line New York, a nonprofit organization that provides guidance, counseling to low-income New York City youth to help them get into college and graduate. And John's colleague, Sarah Borman, is with us also. She joined Jed from Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health, where she was responsible for a large community-based mental health effort in sub-Saharan Africa. As a public health specialist and author, she's written extensively about mental health, global health, and the intersection of public health and psychology, among other topics. Sarah's book, Denying to the Grave, Why We Ignore the Facts That Will Save Us, published by Oxford University Press in 2016, explores the psychology behind irrational health benefits and decisions. It sounds like a book I should read. Sarah and John, happy to have you. Welcome to today's webinar. And with that, I'll turn over the control of the slides to you. And if there should be a question as we go along, please feel free to speak up.
Great. Thank you so much, John. And thank you to NASSP for inviting us to present to you today. So the Jed Foundation is a charity. We are headquartered in New York and work nationwide. Our mission is to protect emotional health and prevent suicide for teens and young adults. And we're working towards a future where teens and young adults are equipped to navigate mental health challenges and to know how to seek help and give help should they need it. that high school students are emotionally prepared for the transition to college and adult life, and that every college student attends a school with a comprehensive system to support mental health. And so we have programs and resources that support each of these goals. Our Set to Go initiative is specific for high school students in the preparation for transition to college. So John, if possible, could you forward the slide? Great, thank you. So we conducted research with Nielsen of 1,500 first-year college students to explore what issues and experiences did they have in that first year that they were not prepared for. And we learned several things. We learned first that the majority feel like social media and television, et cetera, make college feel more fun or seem more fun than it actually is. That half feel that college is not living up to their expectations. Almost half feeling like everyone else has college figured out except for themselves. And when we look at the college prep process and what they experienced, the vast majority, 87%, reported that the college prep process was far more focused on academics than emotional readiness. And more than half felt great emphasis and pressure to attend a well-known, prestigious college, rather than the emphasis being on one that was the best fit for them. Overall, 60% of first-year college students stated that they wish that they had been better prepared for the emotional health challenges of transitioning to college than they were. And if you look at those 60% who wished that they were better prepared emotionally, those students were more likely to have a lower GPA and more likely to be struggling at school. Next slide. So today, our recognition, our insight is that emotional readiness is not part of today's college prep paradigm, or not as much a part of it as it should be. That many high school seniors have underdeveloped independent living skills, life skills, and resilience, which we know are protective factors for mental health in college and adult life. As I said, most feel underprepared emotionally, and those who feel underprepared are more likely to have a lower GPA, more likely to rate their college experiences poor or terrible. Next slide, John. So our insight is that high school students do not realize that even if they get into college and get the necessary financial aid to attend, their success could still be hindered by how socially or emotionally ready they are. Next slide, please. And our vision is that high school students understand this. They understand that there's more to college than getting in and getting there, and they know that emotional preparation leads to success, and that students themselves are taking actions to prepare, and that schools and families are helping students with this transition. Next slide. Now Sarah Gorman will take over the presentation.
Thank you, John. Thank you to both the Johns, actually. So I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about a program we've developed in response to some of the research that John just outlined for you. And this program is called Set to Go. And the first thing we did was develop a framework for Set to Go. And we did this in consultation with a number of experts in our organization, as well as outside of it, expert advisors in adolescent mental health, psychology, as well as in higher education and secondary education. And we came up with these 5 areas that we think will lead to better emotional preparedness for the transition out of high school. And I'll go into detail each one in a minute, but they are generally college in perspective, putting college in perspective, basic life skills, social and emotional skills, mental health and substance abuse literacy, and then some focus on the transition and what it takes to really adjust to college life. And our feeling is that students who leave high school with a well-developed knowledge and skills in all of these domains will be emotionally prepared for success beyond high school. Next slide, please. So as I said, there are 5 domains to our framework. The first one I mentioned is called College in Perspective. And this is where we really want high school students to be, and their families, to be thinking about good as a fit of a college. It's not just about the prestige of the institution or just the academic fit, but really a broader sense of fit from a personal perspective, from an emotional perspective, and all things along those lines. And so that's those things are important considerations in the college selection process. In terms of basic life skills, oh, sorry, go back one. Thanks. In terms of basic life skills, we believe that all students should be leaving high school with a good grasp on time management, things like time management, financial management, things that they will have to manage on their own that they may not have when they're in high school. And of course, very importantly, also self-care skills, things like really good knowledge and practices around sleep hygiene and eating behaviors, and again, things that they may have to manage more on their own that may have been structured for them when they were in high school. In social and emotional skills, we know that this is an area that a lot of schools are interested in and working very hard on, and there are curricula that have been developed that are sometimes more focused on the younger kids than the high school kids. But we also think that these skills should be developed again in high school to really protect students and their emotional health as they go off to college. And so these are things like self-awareness, emotional self-management, social awareness, and of course resilience, which is a huge topic as well. And then mental health and substance abuse literacy. Obviously, the Jed Foundation has a great deal of expertise in this area and educating people about mental health issues. We think that every high school student should be going off to college with a very good grounding in how to recognize mental health issues and substance abuse issues and how to get help, and also how to help each other, how to give help and how to seek help. And then finally, adjusting to college life. So everything that students need to know about how things are different academically, some of the stress and pressures that might be different that they're under in college. And then importantly, also transitioning any mental health care for students that do have a history of mental health issues, making sure that they and their parents and families know how to make sure that that care is successfully transitioned from home to college. That can be a place where sometimes people fall through the cracks and it's very difficult. We want to make sure people are thinking about that early and in a detailed way. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the homepage of our website, which is, you can see at the bottom, the URL, settogo.org. And basically everything that I just talked about in those 5 domains are huge topics, obviously. And so we have a website full of resources on each one, and they're split into the perspective of students, families, and educators. And we have a couple of really key tools and all of this is free and you can use and share with your schools and colleagues. We have a couple of key tools that I just want to describe to you a bit as well. So next slide, please. So this just gives you a little bit more of a sense of how the website is broken down, families, students, and educators. And we provide these resources and tools, which I'll talk more about in a minute, to help these young adults really navigate the transition from high school to into adulthood. Next slide. So some of the key resources here are, we have this thing called the Right Fit worksheet that we developed to really help students select the best fit colleges. So the concept I was talking about before under the College in Perspective bucket is really about making sure that there's a broader consideration of what might be the right fit for a school outside of just academic factors. And so the Right Fit worksheet, again, is a free online resource we've developed that really walks students through some of the questions that they should be asking and some of the dimensions that they should consider as they're looking at different colleges. We also have a guide that we developed in collaboration with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. It's called the Conversation, College and Your Mental Health. And this really goes through and is especially helpful for both families and students. It goes through some of the privacy laws and notification rules around student mental health and health in general, and just their information in general, things that can be shared with parents and families and what can't. And we really think that we provide forms in this guide that students can sign to be able to release information to a trusted adult of their choice. It doesn't have to be their parents, but it certainly can be. And we really urge students to consider signing one of these forms before they go to college, so that in the event of a situation where they're incapacitated or they're unable to allow the release of the information, but an adult really should know that this can happen seamlessly. We've definitely seen issues where sometimes families are not notified, even in situations that most people would consider emergencies. So we really encourage people to think about and talk about this early on. And then we also have a transition of care planning guide, which gets at something I was talking about a little bit earlier. In the case of students who have a pre-existing condition or who have a history of having mental health issues and are receiving care in high school, this guide really helps students and their families think about and plan for how they're going to transition their care to college. Next slide, please. That's just a picture to give you a sense of what these tools look like and to reinforce some of them. And we have a tab on our Set to Go site called Tools that contains all of these downloadable in PDF. Next slide. Back one. Okay. So what are we doing with all of this and where are we going? So our goal, as John said, and I've hopefully reinforced, is we're trying to make emotional readiness for college become really a standard and very present component of the college preparation process for high school students and their families across the country. And so this year in 2018, we're really focusing on disseminating these concepts and materials widely to key populations, including all of you and, of course, parents and students. Embarking on content partnerships with organizations that intersect with these key populations. We recently launched a partnership with WebMD that really, I think, reaches the parent population very well and gives them a lot of information about how to think about transition, including if their kid has a mental health issue. And we're piloting the implementation of this program and the resources, associated resources, in a couple of high schools across the country as well. And so beyond 2018, we're looking obviously to reach our goal of making emotional readiness for college be really a standard component of the prep process. And we're looking for widespread engagement with schools and school districts to ensure that school systems are able to maximize these opportunities to prepare students emotionally for the transition out of high school and to prevent serious emotional distress that can arise during the transition, and with the course being to ensure success beyond high school. Next slide, please. So what you can do if you're interested in this material and you want to learn more, I think the first step for everyone would be to review our website materials, get in touch and give us feedback. We love feedback and we'd love to hear from you. Discuss today's webinar with your colleagues, students, and their families, and brainstorm how you might be able to bring set-to-go resources to your school communities. Share our materials with your colleagues and your school communities as well. And consider collaborating with us. There are some options for that, and of course you can talk to us further, but you can use you can pilot the use of some of our resources in your school if you look at them and you really think that they're helpful. You can help us continue to improve and develop our materials in the program as advisors and partners. And of course, you can host our content on websites for your schools and professional organizations in partnership with us. I think that might be, next slide, please. I think that might be the last one. Yeah, so that was the last slide, and we're really happy to take any questions you might have about this program, about Jed Foundation more generally. And we just thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, John. Again, I'll invite the participants to type any questions they might have in the question, lay those to Sarah and John, but I do have one or two that have come in that I'll start with. When should students and parents begin to use these resources? Junior year, senior year? What recommendation from you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some of the resources I mentioned might be more geared toward junior and senior year. I think the Right Fit worksheet is obviously something that will only become relevant when a student is really thinking seriously about particular schools. But you'll see, for instance, that the transition of care guide includes steps that students should be taking and their families should be taking from 9th grade on. And this is important because we also want to make sure that all of these conversations and considerations are happening as early into high school as possible where it's relevant. So something like figuring out the best care and how to make sure that a student is really cognizant of what their needs are and what they might need to do when they get to college. That starts early. We also have, we talked some of the other areas that we're working in with Set to Go, such as social and emotional learning and basic life skills. Those are things that, and also mental health and substance abuse literacy. Those are things that students should be engaging with and learning about all throughout their high school careers. We don't think it's something that should just come in at the last minute at the end of their career in high school. So it depends a little bit on the resource, but a lot of the resources and concepts that we talked about should be incorporated early on, I think, for the best results.
Another question just came in. Have you had any experience navigating with college prep colleagues who do seem to push the mindset of prestige more so than looking at the good fit? And might you have some guidance on how to shift that mindset?
Well, so we have.
John, you're not.
I'm sorry, this is John. We have had some experience working with and talking to college advisors, be they school-based or independent, who do emphasize prestige over fit. And I think that the key here is really to educate on this point to students and families and for leadership in schools to emphasize the importance of fit. In our work, we often talk about who are the highest risk students for mental health challenges and emotional distress at college. And one of the highest risk groups are students who probably shouldn't have been at that school in the first place because it wasn't a right fit. What we have received resistance to this point at times, but I just think that what we all need to do together is to change the norms and the expectation around this and help make sure that high school students are going to schools that are the best possible fit for them.
Thank you, John. There's a similar question, and that is, are there any resources either in the Set to Go materials or in the Jed Foundation in general for helping students and parents navigate the decision-making process about whether or not to go to college? Your sound has faded, John, if you were answering. I'm hearing just...
I'm sorry, Sarah and I were talking to each other.
Okay, go ahead.
I believe there is some content on Set to Go about whether college is right for the student or right at this time. And that's in the College in Perspective section.
Okay. Thank you. Another question. Can you name, or will you please name the elements of the Set to Go model again for us?
Oh, sure. There are 5. There's College in Perspective, basic life skills, social and emotional skills, mental health and substance abuse literacy, and adjusting to college life, which is really about the transition itself.
Thank you. One more chance if anybody else wants to send in a question. Here's one. Can you explain why it's important to consider social emotional fit in the college selection process? I know you've said some things about that, but could you say more?
Sure. So we do, I think we talk about having, first of all, having social and emotional skills as one aspect of the model. So that's something that students need to be able to master, I think, before they get to college. In terms of the fit concept, I think that we find that students who only think about prestige or only think about academic fit, not always, but often have some difficulty when they get to college and they hadn't really considered other factors. I mean, there are plenty of examples of people who, you know, really thrive in a small college, in a small group setting, and end up going to a big college because that was more prestigious and that was the school that they were maybe told to aim for, but then they really are unable to maximize their academic potential anyway because they're really in the wrong environment. And so, you know, with all of these things, it's really important to think holistically. This is not just an experience that where, you know, people are just taking classes and operating academically, but they're also living there for, you know, 2 to 4 years in many cases, and they're building their first experience of adult life and exploring their identities and all of those other things that go on in those years in college. And so it's really important that they think about those other dimensions to the experience and not just the academic side of things. John, do you have something to add?
I just want to add a comment specifically about students that have had a positive history of a mental health challenge, whether it's anxiety or depression, a substance use issue, eating disorders. It could be across a whole range of potential issues. That consideration for where they go to school in terms of the right fit becomes very important. You know, does that student have a care team, a therapist in their home town? Is it right to you know, to pull them out and set up care in a new setting? This needs to be thought through. Where they go to school, are there resources in that community that can help them if they do have a relapse or struggle? So this is also, these kinds of considerations are also part of this and need to be part of this fit discussion. And I know we're giving a long answer to this question, but one of the things we see as a frequent situation is a student who struggles significantly in the transition into high school with anxiety, maybe school refusal behavior, and then they sort of find their way, they get their feet under them, and they're doing quite well by the time they're a senior. That profile on that student is very likely to have similar difficulty as they transition from high school to college. And that needs to be thought about and prepared for, even though they may have been doing well for the last 2 to 3 years. This next big transition may bring up the same kinds of issues. We're set to go, these are the kinds of things we're saying that everyone in the ecosystem around the student needs to be thinking about, and it goes all the way through to the selection of the school.
Thank you very much. Sarah, give you an opportunity for a last word, or John, any other closing comments? No other questions have come in at this point, so anything you'd like to say to close us out for today?
No, I just want to thank you again for having us and for the great questions. And please visit our website and let us know if you have questions.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. That was a pleasure.
Something's happened to your sound, John. We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. I said thank you. It was a pleasure to participate today. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for being here. And I'd like to thank everybody who signed on and joined us, and especially thanks to, with that, I'll sign off.